Elias Vane was halfway through filling the sixth grave when the youngest child asked if he could have the blue ribbon from the coffin. The wind carried the question across the frozen hill behind the ranch house, thin as a bird's cry. Elias stopped with both hands locked around the shovel. Below him, the valley lay white beneath a hard Wyoming sky. His barn had burned black 3 nights earlier. His fields were buried under snow. And in the row of fresh earth before him lay his wife, his daughter, his 2 sons, and the old parents who had come to live with them after the fever took hold. He had buried every person who had ever called him home. The child standing at the bottom of the hill wore a coat too large for him and boots held together with twine. There were 5 others behind him, all mounted on tired horses, all watching Elias with the solemn silence of people who had learned too early that no grown man could be trusted to answer gently. The boy pointed toward the grave. "My sister liked blue," he said. "Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from. There is something good about knowing who is sharing the fire with us." Elias looked at the ribbon tied around the small pine box. It had belonged to his daughter, May. She had worn it in her hair the last Sunday. She was well enough to sit on the porch and tell him the snow looked like heaven had dropped its flour sack. He should have said no. A man who had lost as much as Elias had a right to keep one thing. But the boy's face had the gray, pinched look of hunger. His fingers were blue at the knuckles. And behind him, a little girl coughed into a wool scarf that had been wrapped around her head twice because it was too large for her. Elias walked down the hill. He untied the ribbon with hands that would not stop shaking. Then he crouched in front of the boy. "What's your name?" "Cal." "Where are your people, Cal?" The boy stared at the blue ribbon in Elias's palm. "Dead," he said. It was not a dramatic answer. It was worse than that. It was practiced. Elias looked past him at the children. The eldest was a girl of perhaps 14, narrow-faced and straight-backed despite the cold. She had a rifle across her saddle. Not a child's rifle. A full-sized Henry, too heavy for her shoulders. Her jaw was set in the hard way of someone who had been forced to become older than she was. "My name is Nora Bell," she said. "These are Cal, Ruthie, Amos, Tilda, and Ben. We came from the Weller place, east of Rollins." Elias knew the Weller place. Everybody in 3 counties knew it. Silas Weller owned the freight contracts, the grain store, the bank, and enough land to make men call him generous when he took their farms. His ranch house had 2 chimneys and windows tall as church doors. People said he kept a silver-headed cane by his desk, though no one had ever seen him limp. "What happened to your folks?" Elias asked. Nora's eyes did not leave his. Mr. Weller happened. The wind moved through the grass beneath the snow. Somewhere down in the valley, a loose piece of tin knocked against the ruined barn. Elias had not said Silas Weller's name since the fever came. Weller had offered him a loan after the first crop failed. Elias had refused. Then Weller had sent men to remind him that refusing rich men was not the same as being free of them. But that was before the fever, before the graves, before Elias had become a man so hollow he sometimes forgot to breathe until his chest hurt. Nora reached inside her coat and pulled out an envelope, bent and stained by weather. She held it toward him. "It was in my mama's Bible. She said if anything ever happened, take it to Elias Vane. She said he'd know what to do." Elias did not take it. "I don't know what to do," he said. The children stood very still. Then little Ruthie, the coughing girl, looked up at him. "Could we at least stand somewhere out of the wind?" That was how 6 orphans rode into Elias Vane's empty life. Not with music, not with a miracle, with cold feet, hungry horses, and a question he had no strength to answer. He put them in the ranch house because there was nowhere else to put them. He told himself it was only for one night. The same lie he told himself when he gave them the last of the flour. The same lie he told himself when he chopped apart the broken kitchen table for firewood because the woodpile was low and the nights had teeth. Inside, the house smelled of smoke, damp wool, and the ghost of his old life. Mary's copper kettle still hung above the stove. May's little shoes were still beneath the bench by the door. Elias had not moved them. He did not know why. Nora noticed them first. She said nothing, but her face changed. That night, Elias slept in the chair by the fire with his rifle across his knees. He woke every hour to the sound of children breathing. Ruthie wheezed. Ben whimpered in dreams. Amos, who could not have been more than 8, woke once and whispered for his father. Nora sat beside him in the dark. "He dreams about the river," she said. Elias stared into the dying coals. What river? The one where our wagon went over. Mama and Pa were driving us away from the Weller place. Mr. Weller's men were after us. Pa got shot. The horses panicked. Her voice caught, but she forced it down. Mama got us out. She didn't get out herself. Elias gripped the rifle until his knuckles turned pale. Why were Weller's men after you? Nora looked toward the children asleep on the floor. Because my mama found something she wasn't supposed to find. She handed him the envelope. This time, Elias took it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in a woman's hurried writing. Martha Bell had been Weller's housekeeper for 11 years. She had seen the ledger hidden beneath the false bottom of his desk. She had copied names, dates, amounts, and the marks of men who had been forced to sign away property they never owed. There were ranchers Elias knew, widows, veterans, families whose barns had burned at convenient times, families who had vanished. At the bottom, Martha had written one line. If Silas Weller gets this back, he will bury us all. Elias read it twice. Then he folded the paper and put it inside his shirt. Nora watched him. Will you help us? He could have said no. He had every reason in the world to say no. He had graves to tend, a ranch to lose, a body that had forgotten how to carry joy. Weller was powerful, and Elias was one man with an empty house. Helping the children would bring danger to the only place Mary had ever loved. But then he heard Ben crying in his sleep, and he remembered his daughter asking him, years ago, why people had to die. He had told her the first thing that came to mind. So the people who love them can learn how much love they had. Now, in the dark, that old answer seemed cruel. Elias rose from the chair and went to the kitchen. Nora followed. What are you doing? She asked. Making coffee. You said you were out. I found some. He did not tell her it was Mary's last jar, hidden behind the flour tin because she had been saving it for Christmas. The next morning, Elias saddled his horse and rode to town with Nora beside him. The other children stayed behind with strict instructions not to open the door for anyone except him. Nora wore May's old scarf around her neck. It was too bright against her worn brown coat. She did not know whose it had been. Elias could not bring himself to tell her. Rollins was a raw little town of false front buildings and muddy streets frozen into ridges. The blacksmith's hammer rang from the far end of town. Horses steamed at the hitching rail. Men turned to look when Elias rode in with a girl carrying a rifle. At the general store, old Mr. Haskins wiped the same clean spot on his counter 3 times before speaking. Elias, he said, heard about your family. Elias nodded. Horrible thing. Yes. Haskins looked at Nora. Then he looked past them, toward the street. You ought to be careful, he said quietly. Careful of what? The storekeeper's cloth stopped moving. You know. Elias did know. Silas Weller's black carriage stood outside the bank. The door opened, and Weller stepped down in a dark coat with fur at the collar. He was not a large man. That was part of what made him unsettling. He looked like a banker who had accidentally wandered into the West, clean and polished, and completely certain the dirt would move aside for him. 2 men walked behind him. One had a scar through his eyebrow. The other carried a shotgun beneath his coat. Weller smiled when he saw Elias. Mr. Vane, he said, I was sorry to hear of your troubles. Elias said nothing. Weller's eyes moved to Nora. They stayed there a moment too long. And who is this? My niece, Elias said. Nora glanced at him. He had not planned the lie. It came out before he could stop it. Weller's smile softened. Family is a blessing, he said, especially after loss. The words landed like cold ash. I understand you have 6 of them now, Weller continued. That is a great burden for a grieving man. They're not your concern. Everything in this valley is my concern. Weller leaned closer. His voice stayed mild. Bring me what Martha Bell took, and I will make certain those children are placed somewhere warm, somewhere proper. You can return to your mourning. Nora's fingers tightened around the rifle strap. Elias could have handed over the paper. Weller might have kept his word about warmth. He might have put the children in separate homes with food on the table and blankets on their beds. Elias could go back to the hill and bury his loneliness alongside the people he loved. But he looked at Nora. She had heard every word, and he saw what she expected from him. Not rescue. Abandonment. Elias stepped between her and Weller. You tell your men, he said, to stay off my land. For the first time, Weller's smile disappeared. You are a tired man, Elias. I am. Tired men make poor decisions. Then I reckon I've made mine. Weller tapped the silver head of his cane against the street. You have until Sunday." Then he walked away. That afternoon, Elias did not ride home by the main road. He cut through the creek bottom, where cottonwoods bent over the ice and the snow showed every track. Nora watched him study the ground. "You can tell who's been here." "Sometimes." "What does it say?" "3 riders. 2 went toward my place. 1 went back to town." Her face went pale. Elias dismounted and touched the prints. The tracks were fresh. Weller had sent men ahead. They rode hard. When the ranch house came into view, smoke curled from the chimney. For one terrible second, Elias thought the children had lit the house on fire. Then the front door opened, and Cal ran out waving both arms. "Mr. Vane." Ruthie made bread. Ruthie stood behind him, flour on her cheeks and a proud little smile on her face. Elias looked beyond them. The kitchen table was gone, burned for warmth. But the floor had been swept. The broken shutters had been tied closed with strips of cloth. Ben was sitting beside the stove, carving little horses from scraps of pine with Elias's old pocket knife. The house did not look happy, but it looked alive. That evening, Elias taught Nora how to read a trail. He showed Amos how to feed the horses without losing fingers. Ruthie and Tilda washed dishes in water gone gray from use, arguing quietly about whether the moon looked bigger in winter. Cal followed Elias to the porch. "Are those bad men coming here?" "Yes." Cal swallowed. "Are you scared?" Elias looked toward the dark horizon. "Yes." Cal seemed surprised by the answer. Elias rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Being scared don't mean you run. It means you pay attention." Cal considered that. Then he nodded as if Elias had handed him something precious. Later, Nora found Elias in the barn ruins, sorting through scorched boards for anything that could still be used. "You lied in town," she said. "About what?" "You said I was your niece." Elias kept working. "You needed a name." "I had one." "You needed a safer one." Nora was quiet. Then she said, "My mama used to say people aren't just the things they lose." Elias stopped. The wind pressed against the broken walls. Nora looked down at the blackened beam between them. She said, "Losing your people changes you, but it doesn't get to finish you." That was the first time Elias cried where anyone could see him. He turned away, but Nora did not pretend not to notice. She simply stood beside him in the cold while he let the grief come, slow and deep, like water breaking through ice. On Saturday night, Sheriff Alden Pike came to the ranch. He rode alone, which was brave or foolish. Elias had never decided which kind of man Pike was. The sheriff was broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with one hand that shook whenever he reached for his hat. He had been wounded in the war, people said, though no one knew which one. He stood on the porch and did not ask to come in. "Weller's gathering men," he said. "I know. He has papers saying you're harboring stolen children." "They aren't stolen." "I know that too." "Then do something." Pike looked down at his boots. "I tried once. Years ago. He bought the judge, the clerk, and half the council. Men who testified against him lost their land. One lost his life." Elias stepped closer. "So you quit?" The sheriff's face tightened. "Yes." The honesty of it hung between them. Inside, the children were quiet. They knew enough now to understand danger. Pike looked through the window. Ruthie was asleep against Tilda's shoulder. Cal sat on the floor beside Ben, holding a poker like it was a sword. Nora stood near the table, straight-backed and watchful. "You have that ledger copy?" Pike asked. "Yes." "It won't be enough in this town." "Then where is enough?" Pike looked toward the north. "Federal Land Office in Cheyenne. Weller's been filing claims there. If the records match Martha's copy, he can't buy his way out of it. It's 2 days in winter. More with children." Elias knew what Pike was offering. A chance. Not safety. A chance. But Weller's deadline was Sunday morning. Pike said, "You could send the children with me tonight." "No. You trust me less than you trust yourself?" "I don't trust anyone." The sheriff gave a tired nod. "Fair enough." He turned to go. Then Nora opened the door. "Sheriff," she said. Pike faced her. "Did you ever have children?" The old man's shaking hand tightened around his hat. "A daughter," he said. "Lucy." "Where is she?" "Colorado. Married. Has 2 boys." "Does she know you were scared?" Pike looked at the girl for a long time. "No," he said. Nora nodded once. "Maybe you should tell her." Pike's eyes filled, though he blinked it away. "I reckon maybe I should." After he rode off, Elias found Nora by the stove. "You didn't have to say that," he told her. "Yes, I did." "Why?" She looked at him with that hard young face. Because people who are scared sometimes need help remembering they're still good. At midnight, the dogs began barking. Elias was awake before the second bark. He moved through the house without lighting a lamp. The children had been sleeping in their clothes. He had told them it was because of the cold. Nora knew better. He handed her the rifle. "Back room," he said. "Keep them low." "What are you doing?" "Buying time." Outside, horses snorted in the dark. A voice called from the yard. "Elias Vane. Mr. Weller says come out." Elias stepped onto the porch with his shotgun. Moonlight lay across the snow. 5 riders waited by the fence. The scarred man was among them. "You got till dawn," the man said. "Give us the paper and the kids, and Weller lets you keep your house." Elias looked behind him through the open door. The children had gathered in the hallway. Cal had his hands over Ruthie's ears. Ben clutched the little wooden horse he had carved. Elias came down the steps. "This house already burned once," he said. "I'm not much afraid of losing it." The scarred man laughed. Then a shot cracked through the night. Not from Elias. From the window above the porch. Nora had fired into the snow beside the riders' horses. The animals reared, screaming. One rider fell. The others cursed and pulled back. Elias did not waste the moment. He fired at the lantern hanging from the fence post. Darkness swallowed the yard. He ran for the corral, hearing bullets cut through wood behind him. Short breaths. Cold air. Snow under his boots. He opened the gate and drove the horses loose. The animals thundered through the yard, scattering Weller's men. Elias grabbed the nearest saddle horse and swung up behind Nora, who had come flying from the house with the rifle. "Children," he shouted. They came out the back door in a rush, bundled in blankets, terrified and moving because Elias had told them to. They rode into the creek bottom before the men could regroup. The night became a blur of branches, ice, horse breath, and frightened children clinging to saddles. Elias rode at the rear, firing only when he saw movement behind them. He did not know where they were going until Nora pointed toward the old mining trail. "There's a cabin," she said. "Mama hid us there once." They reached it before dawn. The cabin was half buried in snow, but it had a roof and a door that shut. Inside, Elias built a fire with rotten boards from the wall. Ruthie's cough had worsened. Tilda held her hand. Ben stared at the flames as though they might tell him what came next. Elias stood at the window and watched the blue light come into the world. He had failed before. That was the truth he had not spoken aloud. When the fever took Mary and the children, he had been away in town looking for medicine. The bridge had washed out behind him. He had spent 2 days fighting water and mud to get home. By the time he arrived, the house was quiet. He had not been there. He had not held Mary's hand. He had not heard May say goodbye. For months, he had believed that meant he did not deserve another chance to protect anyone. But 6 children were breathing behind him, and Weller was still coming. Nora joined him at the window. "What would you have done in my place?" she asked quietly. "Would you have left us at the house and ridden for help?" It was the kind of question that had no clean answer. The kind that stayed with a person long after the fire went out. Elias looked at the trail disappearing beneath snow. "I would have done what I did before," he said. "I would have tried to do it alone." Nora waited. "And now?" He turned toward the children. "Now I know alone is just another word for losing things you could have saved." By noon, they were moving again. Elias led them north, not toward Cheyenne, but toward the old rail spur where freight wagons passed twice a week. He had a plan, though it was not a good one. He would get the children aboard a wagon bound for the city. He would give Pike the papers. Then he would draw Weller's men away. Nora understood before he said it. "No," she told him. "It's the only way. It's the way where you die. Maybe. You promised. I promised to keep you safe. You promised when you said I was family." Elias could not answer. Nora's face broke then, not loudly, not with the tears of a child. She pressed her fist to her mouth and looked away. "I can't watch another person leave," she whispered. The words cut deeper than any bullet could. Elias climbed down from his horse. He walked to her and took the blue ribbon from where she had tied it around her wrist. It was dirty now, frayed at the edges. "My daughter wore this," he said. Nora looked at him. Her name was May. Elias had not spoken her name since the burial. She was 7. She hated peas. She talked too much. She thought every animal on this ranch belonged to her. His voice shook. "I thought if I kept her things untouched, I was keeping her close. Truth is, I was keeping myself buried with her." Nora reached for his hand. "You don't have to stop loving them," she said. "No, you just have to leave room." He looked at the 6 children, at their tired horses, at the endless white land around them. Then he understood something Mary would have understood in a heartbeat. Love was not a house with only so many rooms. It was a fire. The more people you gathered around it, the farther its light reached. Elias tied the ribbon back around Nora's wrist. "We go together," he said. That was when the riders came over the ridge. Silas Weller rode at their head in his black coat, his silver cane strapped to his saddle. There were 10 men with him, perhaps more. Behind Elias, the rail spur lay a mile away across open ground. No trees, no shelter, no way around. Weller drew his horse to a stop. "You have made this unnecessarily difficult," he called. Elias stepped forward. "You killed Martha Bell." Weller's expression did not change. "Martha Bell made unfortunate choices. You killed her husband. Her husband was a drunk who overturned his wagon. You had him shot." Weller smiled faintly. "You have grief in you, Mr. Vane. It makes men imagine enemies everywhere." Nora raised the rifle. Weller's men lifted their guns. Elias put a hand on the barrel. "Not yet," he said. Weller's gaze drifted to the children. "Give me the paper," he said, "and I will let the little ones live." The air went still. Even the horses seemed to stop breathing. Elias could have drawn. He might have killed Weller. But 10 rifles would answer, and the children would die in the snow. Then he saw something at the far end of the rail spur. A freight wagon. And beside it, Sheriff Pike. Not alone. Behind him rode 3 ranchers Elias recognized from Martha's list. Haskins the storekeeper came too, carrying a rifle. Old Mrs. Darnell, whose husband had lost his farm to Weller, sat in a wagon seat with a shotgun across her lap. Pike had not quit after all. He had gone to ask people to remember what Weller had done. Weller saw them too. For the first time, his calm cracked. "This changes nothing," he said. "It changes everything," Elias replied. Weller reached inside his coat and pulled a pistol. He aimed at Nora. Elias moved before thought could catch him. The shot struck Elias high in the shoulder. He fell to one knee. Nora screamed. Cal cried out. Elias heard the next shot, but it was not Weller's. Sheriff Pike fired from across the field. Weller's pistol spun from his hand. The riders broke apart. Some turned their horses. Some raised their weapons. The snow erupted with gunfire. Elias dragged himself behind a low rise, blood soaking his coat. Nora dropped beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed cloth against his wound. "Stay with me," she said. "I'm here. You better be." Across the field, Weller was trying to reach his horse. His men were leaving him, not all at once, but one by one. The scarred man looked at Weller, then at the ranchers advancing behind Pike. He dropped his rifle into the snow and rode away. Weller stumbled toward the rail spur. Elias saw the ledger copy slip from his own shirt as he moved. The wind caught it and carried it across the snow. Weller saw it too. He lunged for the paper. But Nora was faster. She ran through the snow, blue ribbon flashing at her wrist. Weller grabbed her coat. She twisted, drove her boot down on his injured hand, and wrenched free. He reached again. Elias tried to stand. Then Nora lifted the heavy Henry rifle and pointed it at Silas Weller's chest. Her face was white. Her breath came in clouds. "You took my mama," she said. Weller laughed once, thin and broken. "You are a child." Nora's eyes did not move. "No," she said. "I was." "Then men like you got scared of a woman with a pencil." She picked up the paper. Weller looked toward his horse, toward the road, toward any escape remaining in the world. There was none. Sheriff Pike arrived with handcuffs. As he bound Weller's wrists, the man looked at Elias. "This valley belongs to me." Elias leaned against Nora for support. His shoulder burned. The children stood behind him, close enough that he could feel their warmth through the cold. "No," Elias said. "It belongs to the people you forgot were watching." The federal investigator came from Cheyenne 3 days later, summoned by telegram, and carried by the same freight wagon that had brought Pike's witnesses. He found Weller's hidden ledger beneath the false bottom of his desk exactly where Martha Bell had said it would be. The records matched. The signatures matched. The burned barns, false loans, stolen claims, and dead men matched. Silas Weller lost the bank. He lost the ranch. He lost every acre of land he had taken by threat and deceit. He was taken east in irons, with no carriage, no cane, and no men left to stand behind him. His ranch house became a county home for families waiting out hard winters. The grain store was placed under new management. The land office restored deeds where it could. Where it could not, Compensation came from the sale of Weller's holdings. It did not bring back the dead. Justice never does that. But it stopped him from making more graves. Elias's wound healed slowly. Nora changed his bandages with the solemn care of a surgeon. Ruthie's cough faded when she had enough broth and sleep. Kel learned to ride without gripping the saddle horn. Amos became obsessed with fence repairs. Tilda planted seeds in cracked cups by the window. Ben carved 6 small wooden horses and lined them on the mantel. One evening, months after the snow had melted and the grass had turned gold, Elias stood on the hill behind the house. The graves were green now. Nora found him there with a basket of wildflowers. "I thought these might look nice," she said. He took the basket. Together, they placed flowers on each grave. Elias rested his hand on Mary's marker. "I used to think if I laughed again, it would mean I loved them less." Nora stood beside him. And now, he looked down toward the ranch house. Smoke rose from the chimney. Through the open window came the sound of children arguing about biscuits. "Now I think they would have been angry if I didn't." Nora smiled. "She sounds like she had sense. She had more than I did." That night, Elias sat at the table while 6 children ate stew and talked over one another. The old house was too loud, too crowded, too full of boots by the door and wooden toys underfoot, and questions shouted from room to room. It was everything he had believed he could never survive again. It was everything he had not known he needed. If this story has moved you, you are exactly who it was written for. A like and a subscribe tells us to keep making room at the fire for stories like this. 2 years later, the ranch had a new barn, painted red against the Wyoming sky. Nora was taller, stronger, and still carried the blue ribbon on Sundays. Cal could outride most grown men. Ruthie baked bread that made travelers stop at the gate. Amos mended every broken thing he could find. Tilda kept a garden beside the porch. Ben still carved horses, though now he sold them in town and saved every coin. Elias never stopped visiting the hill, but he no longer went there to disappear. He went there to tell Mary about the children, about Nora's sharp tongue, about Cal's first wild colt, about the way Ruthie sang while kneading dough, about how the house sounded when it was full of life. And every evening, when the work was done and 6 voices called him in from the porch, Elias Vane turned from the graves, walked toward the yellow window light, and found that the family he had buried had not been replaced at all. They had simply taught his broken heart how to open its door again. Next, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a remote Montana ranch because her family was ashamed of her, and the blind rancher who saw her worth before anyone else did.